Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and I hope everybody's having a great day so far today. This video is going to conclude a trilogy of sorts that I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time, and I've already brought up the trilogy in my previous two reviews on Trick from 2019 and Drive Angry from 2011 from this duo known as Patrick Lussier and Todd Farmer. And the reason why I wanted to talk about these films is because I think that the two of them made me a fan based on their first movie that they ever worked on together, and that's why I saved the movie they first worked on together as the last review for this little mini series here, and it is My Bloody Valentine 3D. Now, before I go into anything else, you're going to notice me in a defensive position in this review, mainly because I feel like historically people have kind of brandished this movie along with other slasher remakes out in the ether in a negative light. Now, some subjective criticisms, which to be honest, most criticisms out there are subjective, are sound and make sense, but I have seen some reviewers out there make some really dumb arguments, and I'm just going to bring up the arguments themselves. I'm not going to bring up the reviewers themselves because I'm not trying to start any controversy or call anybody out specifically, but I just kind of want to call out some things, and you might notice that in the tone of the video, so just be warned. But with that aside, I might be blinded by partialness to this film because this was one of the first slasher movies I ever got to experience in the theaters. Now, granted, I grew up going to see horror movies in the theaters, but slashers weren't that mainstream when I was in middle school, right? I mean, there were some sparse ones like Saw movies and such, but there wasn't that many, and a lot of them went straight to video. Like, I remember the Wrong Turn movies going to straight to video, and that's pretty much how at least me and my friends growing up, got to experience slasher movies. So when this movie came out in 2009, it came out in a time where 3D movies were pretty much on the up and coming. They were kind of seeing a re-emergence in the early 2000s, but in the late 2000s, the filmmaking industry, specifically in the horror genre, thought that 3D gimmick horror movies were going to be the next step with this new technology known as Real D 3D. And this film was the very first horror movie ever to be filmed in complete Real D 3D. And I remember going to see it in the theaters, and a lot of people, regardless on opinions of this, that remember seeing it in 3D in the theater, remember it being a fun experience because that's probably the best place to experience a movie like this. Now, in the home media market, I have my Blu-ray 3D copy out for a reason. There's no real optimal way to experience Real D 3D movies, even up to today, without having the proper equipment to experience them. Now, I also have my standard Anaglyph 3D Blu-ray and DVD for the people out there still buying DVDs and using DVDs to watch movies. Godspeed. But there's a big difference in product, and I feel like a lot of people are getting shortchanged when they watch this Anaglyph version here. Because on the back of the DVD, somebody named David Faraci said that this is the best 3D horror film ever made, and that is the absolute 100% truth, and I'll stand on that hill and die on it valiantly. Now, with the lack of equipment aside, this film, I kind of want to get into kind of the background. You know, with all these movies I've been watching, and kind of here on out, I like to watch the special features and the making of to kind of get an idea of where the creators were at when they were making this movie. And there was three main people that I noticed besides the makeup effects person, but I'll get into that later. And the big three were, of course, Patrick Lussier, who was the director of this film, and then Todd Farmer and Zane Smith, who wrote the screenplay of it. And all three seemed to be a massive fan of 80s slashers and held My Bloody Valentine quite highly. Now, they didn't really speak on the art of the remake, but they did mention some things like remakes in their mind was something that you can come back to and kind of as a creator, try to spin it and make it something on its own rather than trying to replicate the success of the original. And I think that's poignantly stated by these guys, because I think personally, when we're talking about horror remakes, you can throw out any slasher horror remake that exists. And the problem with that is that people put these slasher movies that are historically like just plain Jane whodunit slashers, slice of life movies, or just kill fodder movies, and they put them on this pedestal. And when it comes to remaking these movies, obviously there's some open room for a lot of these 80s slashers. And I'm being honest. In My Bloody Valentine, the original, which I have right here, I have the theatrical version, I think I gave a short change to when I was franchise horror reviews. And, you know, I kind of want to call something out here. This is a fantastic movie for what it is. I have flaws with it, but I'm being honest with you all that I really love this film in a lot of ways and appreciate it for what it is. With that being said, though, I also love and appreciate this film despite its flaws as well. And I feel like, before I get into the plot synopsis to kind of, you know, make you think where I'm going with this video, that when it comes to remakes, either you love the remake and you think it's better, or you love the original and think the remake sucks. That's usually the divisive point on the internet, as toxic and as cynical as the internet can be, right? And I feel like even I have been guilty of this in the past, where if you love something more than the other, you tend to want to tear down something else to make the other look better. And I feel like that's pretty much the common case with these slasher remakes, whether you're for or against them. You find people who love the remakes putting the originals way down for some reason, or considerably down, and vice versa. Where I think I see issue with that is, I feel like some people out there in the internet are lacking transparency and kind of pulling, you know, the shortest apple from the shortest limb, and kind of grasping at straws with some non-subjective arguments that really just don't make sense. With that being said, though, I guess we'll get into the plot synopsis because I have a lot to unpack. But I want you to understand that this film, for a remake, in my opinion, and I'm going to tell you my subjective opinion, for a remake, and this is probably the correlation for most slasher remakes, right? They all kind of revisit the old plot in different ways. You can look at the Friday the 13th remake. You can look at the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. I'm just pulling those as, you know, off-the-cuff examples here. But they both kind of add to what the previous stories alluded to. Like in the case of A Nightmare on Elm Street, that movie kind of adds some scenes that were alluded to in the original, but we never actually got to see on screen. And story-wise, it adds things, and there's some volition of reason why the remake exists. Friday the 13th literally takes the plots of the first 3 Friday the 13th movies and just remakes them, and by blending them together. This movie takes a slightly different approach, looks at the plot of the original, sees some things that could be tweaked, and makes significant changes to it and adds layers to the story that just aren't present in the original. Now, I feel like I have to kind of compare the remake and the original here, so I guess I will. But in the remake here, the story starts off with a kind of a flashback. You see these newspapers kind of talking about Harry Warden and this mass murder spree he went on, and the movie kind of shows how that came to be. This guy named Tom Hanniger, who's this young adult, kind of maybe late high school. He seems kind of college age. He's not really a high schooler, but he is running and I guess managing the mine that his father owns. And the supervisor, Harry Warden, is, you know, telling him to operate a switch or something. And Tom fucks everything up and gets Harry trapped with other miners in a part of the mine. They get shut off from everybody. And Tom has to live with that guilt, right? Well, when rescue is able to find Harry Warden, and the miners, they realize that Harry Warden's pretty much the only one left standing, and it seems to be that he's kind of snapped. And when people finally put two and two together what Harry Warden did, he killed all these other miners so he can preserve oxygen, but for some reason, the act of killing kind of made his personality split and caused him to kind of flip on a switch annually every Valentine's Day for, I guess, a year or a few years. And he goes on a killing spree, and he eventually gets stopped, and, you know, he gets shot by the cops and disappears. Well, there's also a scene where the cops are in a hospital, and you kind of see the effects of Harry Warden after he got out of the hospital originally, and like the blood bath spree that he went on, and he went into hiding, and then, you know, I don't want to spoil too much, but that's pretty much, you know, what you get out of the opening here. And all comes to fruition. It connects to Tom Hanniger. He's with his girlfriend named Sarah and his friend Axel and a couple other buddies. They're drinking at the mine, just, I guess, around Valentine's Day, just having a good old time. And they, of course, interact with Harry Warden, and Harry Warden presumably gets chased out of the mine, shot. We don't really know what happens to him, but a lot of kids die, and Tom is face splattered with blood and left there, kind of shaken from the whole ordeal. But when we catch up to present day, Tom has been missing from the town for about 10 years, and he's come back, and we don't know the reason why. And we get to catch up on Sarah and Axel. They're now married, but they seem to have marriage problems. Sarah appears to still hold on to some hope that Tom may return, and Axel appears to be having an affair with another woman that seems to be all over him as opposed to his wife. And what makes it more complicated is that the two of them have a son together, and, you know, Tom coming back kind of throws a monkey wrench in that relationship. And throughout the rest of the movie, you see Sarah going back to Tom, and you see this love triangle and this confliction with her character about holding on to the past with Tom. And then Tom has his own ulterior motives of why he's there, and you learn of that. It has to do with the mine. The town seems to be upset with him. And then Axel, he's a police officer, and all these killings start coming up to the scene because Tom returned, and he's investigating. And pretty much as these killings go on, Axel gets the suspicion that Tom may or may not be involved with this because there's a revelation about Harry Warden and what became of him. And you go through this whole whodunit plot, and essentially you find out who it is by the end. You see some brutal 3D kills throughout the mix of the movie. The pace is pretty solid on it. And when you get to the revelation, you find out who the killer is. Is it Harry Warden? Is it not? You find out what's happened to the killer, all of that, and there's some sequel bait at the end, like a typical slasher movie. And that's essentially what you're going to get out of the plot here. But synopsis out the way, let's get into some negatives about it. Now, there are some things about this movie that I think are acquired taste, but I don't find negatives, but I do think kind of hold the film back. And I think it's some sleazy moments to the movie. Now, a lot of people can appreciate sleaziness in movies. I myself love sleazy slasher movies. Friday the 13th Part 5 is pretty much in the same vein as this film. And I think that Todd Farmer and Patrick Lussier went that sleazy route because the original just didn't have that sleaziness to it. It did have this campiness and this cheesiness and cheesy music, but it didn't have this level of just in-your-face nudity. And there's a famous scene in this movie where there's 10 minutes of just straight full frontal nudity from this actress. And you see, you literally see everything. And there's some weird direction choices, like there's an actress who plays a motel owner, and she's like a little person. Like, there's just odd things in this movie that just, I think, kind of stick out like sore thumbs more than kind of add anything to the plot. And I could totally see why that might be kind of a deterrent, because it's obviously going for just a raunchier slasher than the original was. Now, like I said, I might kind of have to compare the original here, but I guess part of the negatives about the remake that I think a lot of people will say when they compare it to the original is that the original was a low-budget Paramount production slasher filmed in Canada. It had this small-town charm to it. All the actors kind of brought something that old-school movies just brought to the table that is not present here. But it is evident there's not the same charm as the original there. The whole Valentine's Day gimmick, you know, that's pretty much what made the original My Bloody Valentine a staple in slashers, because back in the day, every holiday had a slasher almost, and this one was the Valentine's Day one for a long time. And people just loved the gimmick of it. This one has the gimmick, but it's not as strong as the original, right? And I think the big elephant in the room, maybe not speaking for the theatrical version, but at least the very popular uncut version of this film, which is on 4K, and I really want to get that because the uncut version of this film is immaculate. But the theatrical version here has some gore to it, not as much as the uncut version, and I think a lot of people resonate with the gore in the movie, even though the gore is more utilized in that old school way, off camera, blending in with on camera kills. It's not really in your face like the remake can be, but the practical effects are more on display because this is this pre-CGI, and of course this is a Lionsgate movie, so there's going to be a blend of CGI and practical effects. And for some reason, slasher fans don't like it when CGI is used in a slasher movie. So it is what it is. But these days, especially since 2009 onward, all the major slasher movies have had CGI blood in it. But those are pretty much the comparisons that are the most common things you hear about why people love the original more than the remake. And if it's not those things, you do hear about the characters. And the three main characters you have to care about, really, are TJ/Tom. TJ is the original version. Tom is the remake's version of the character. Axel, who's the same name in both. And then Sarah. They're all different. In the original, TJ and Axel are strictly minors. And they want to go to this Valentine's Day dance. And they're both interested in Sarah, the same girl. They're neither one of them are married to her, but they both have seemingly a connection to her. Now, TJ and Sarah's relationship is definitely more fleshed out than Axel and Sarah's relationship in the original, and I think that made it kind of lopsided in that love triangle, and in my opinion, I think holds it back. But in the remake, I think that love triangle is definitely fleshed out and layered a bit better, and a lot of people want to say that they like the love triangle angle better than the remake, and I guess it's because in both versions you go down, there's some type of mental illness twist to the killers, on who the killers are, and they may or may not involve Harry Warden in both versions here. Now, the thing is here, here's one of the biggest bullshit things I think I've heard on objective criticisms about this movie, is that there's people out there that I've heard say shit like they think that the mental illness bit was not handled the best in the remake because of what it entails about, I guess, PTSD and multiple personality disorder. But if you look at the fucking remake and you know who's behind all this shit, there's literally another personality there, and it's clearly implied, and they're clearly mentally ill too. But the justification, I heard this person say, is because they think it's handled better here because he was a child when all this stuff happened. And that might be mild spoilers, but I just think that's absolute dumb. Like, how does that make fucking sense? Mental illness is mental illness, no matter what avenue you go. It doesn't care about what age you are. It doesn't care about what gender you are, whatever the fuck you are. Mental illness is mental illness. And both of these do it a bit differently. But when you're saying shit like that, that just comes off really dumb. Now, in the love triangle part, that's I guess the other facet of the annoying things I hear about this movie is that people think that the original is much more deep, and I'm calling foul on that bullshit because in the remake, the love triangle, you have Tom who's been gone for 10 years. Obviously, Sarah's still holding on to Tom. You get the sense that she settled for Axel. And Axel realizes that Sarah settled for him once Tom comes back. But he's already been having this affair with this other girl that Sarah works with throughout the whole movie because she wants him. And she gives him something that he's just missing in that marriage. Their marriage is toxic. It's pretty much a play on just settling for people. And Tom was really the guy that she wanted. And kind of like the original, Sarah holds some resentment towards Tom, just like the Sarah from the original held resentment against TJ for leaving. But in the original, you never know why the fuck TJ left to begin with. I think it's implied that he kind of wanted to make a name for himself and not be stuck in this town and be reliant on all these people's jobs. As in the case for Tom, it's kind of implied, well, actually explicitly stated, that he left because of the trauma that he faced on that night dealing with Harry Warden. He left because he just needed to get away. And there's a whole different rabbit hole dealing with that. And you get this sense that there's tension between Tom and Axel about Sarah, and, you know, there's confliction there, I guess more forced in to kind of make it feel like the original. I think the creators really didn't have to go that avenue, but it does work in the sense that Axel kind of feels like he possesses Sarah and kind of treats her like an item, like, hey, look, I got the prize girl that everybody wanted to be with when we were younger. And Tom threw that chance away, but now Tom's back, he sees the cracks in their relationship and thinks that he can break through to her. It's just way more layered in the remake than the original ever was. And a lot of the film is spent characterizing these characters. And the added layer that I think is kind of genius in the remake is by making Axel a police officer. It kind of makes him more of a, I don't know, he's more of a conundrum of a character. You know, he's having an affair, but he's a police officer. He's supposed to be upstanding and forthright. But he's also very suspicious throughout the film, and you think that he could be the killer or something, or maybe tied to Harry Warden in some way. And you really don't know what the direction could be for his character. And he kind of is a hateable character because of the actions he does in the film, but he ends up kind of coming around. Tom is a conundrum too. You don't know why he left. You don't really know his shtick. And he seems to be holding some pain within, but you don't know what it is. And the movie definitely expresses what that is. And then, of course, Sarah, that goes without saying that she's the glue that pretty much holds the plot together in the movie. And I think Sarah's given a much more better role than she was in the original. So, and that also stems down to the actors of the film. I think Jensen Ackles, Jamie King, and Kerr Smith, who played the three main characters, did a phenomenal job, not taking anything away from the actors from the original. I just think that the story makes more sense thematically when you're thinking about the love triangle there. So the criticisms against that is just horseshit to me. But I guess we'll address the 3D. I guess we'll address it now. The 3D. A lot of people don't like the 3D. It is what it is. 3D is an acquired taste. It's a gimmick movie, just like Choose Your Own Adventure is a gimmick book style. Game books are gimmicks. And there's others in the genre, but 3D is probably the most popular gimmick in the movie realm to begin with. And in horror movies, it's very hit or miss. But I dare say that the only horror film I actually own in 3D, in Blu-ray 3D specifically, is this film because it looks great. The kills in this movie look spectacular in the 3D. When you're watching it in Blu-ray 3D and you're watching it in the optimal viewing experience. I mean, HD quality serves this movie justice. This was what real 3D was made for. If you're still watching the piss-poor version on DVD, you're doing yourself an injustice. But if you don't care, you can still watch it in 2D and then just not embrace the novelty of it. And it is what it is. That's a subjective thing. But the 3D effects here look really great. And I have to give my hat to Gary Tunnicliffe. I've already praised him in Trick. Gary Tunnicliffe, if you want to know more about what he did for this film, and if you really want to know the magnitude of CGI this film used, go watch the making of this movie. He shows you many practical set pieces that he made for the film. He made a plaster and like robotics and all this stuff of actors that get killed in the movie. And of course, Tom Atkins, the legendary Atkins, is in this movie. I can't believe I didn't mention that in my Drive Angry review for that film, but he's also in this, and he's also pretty much going to be in every single Lucier and Farmer film they ever make together. Yeah, what he did with those effects, he showed you that all these scenes that people say are CGI, there was a huge level of practical there. And there's some behind the scenes stuff where they're filling up like blood into this stuff. There's practical there. Now, there's 3 specific scenes that use CGI blood here, and there are some iffy CGI effects too. But the gore and the kills, for the most part, look spectacular. Okay, and Gary Tunnicliffe did a phenomenal job here. Kind of addressing Lucier's shaky cam that he's done in the Trick movie and in here. A lot of people don't like Lucier's shaky cam. That's another subjective thing I can understand, but I think it puts me more in the moment. I quite enjoy it. It makes me more unsettled. And yeah. I mean, I dig this the gritty style to this, right? Now, when it comes to character dialogue is hit or miss in this film. There are some characters with really shitty dialogue. But I think these are some kinks that Farmer and Lucier haven't really been able to work out across all 3 of their films. I think that's mostly due to Todd Farmer. He just has this distinct style. He goes back to Jason X. If you've seen that movie, you can pretty much understand pretty much all his movies that he writes. There's some less than stellar dialogue there too. And not to mention, like Drive Angry, and this kind of makes me like Drive Angry less, because when you look at some of the 3D effects they put in the movie to kind of like make it more over the top, Drive Angry literally just had a bunch of the same similar effect. There is a bullet that does the whole thing across the screen, and there are some explosions just to kind of make it more over the top while in the mine and stuff. But yeah, there are some give and takes with it too. And I'm not trying to sit here and boast up the movie too much. Let me be honest. Let me be honest. And I said this in my past review about this. The 2D version of this film does not look good, right? You wouldn't think it would look good. I mean, you see some potential, you'd be like, oh, then maybe that would look cool in 3D. And I'm telling you, in the optimal 3D version, it looks fantastic. But in the 2D, just by itself, even with the 1080p quality, not this 480 or 720p quality here, it still doesn't look the greatest. And I think that really holds it back. Because if you aren't watching it with the optimal equipment and you don't have it handy, you can't really enjoy it the same every time, right? And I do acknowledge that, right? But nonetheless, how I feel about this movie, in a nutshell, I think this is a great movie despite its flaws. I really do. I think both the original and the remake are great movies despite their flaws. I think the remake's biggest flaw is that it doesn't really handle the whodunit mystery better. And I guess I totally skimmed over this, but I guess I have one last thing to say. The whodunit mystery in the remake, in my opinion, is more enthralling, even though it has a lot more narrower suspects. It definitely fleshes out the suspects it does have a little bit better. And you can pretty much pinpoint down to 3 people who the killers can be in the remake, but they all have sound motives, and the movie builds them up evenly, which I think is really good, compared to the original that feels more left field. Even though it's iconic, even though it recontextualizes a certain character and a certain relationship involving the character and all that. I just don't like the execution of it, right? That's probably my biggest negative with this. But this one has some small things that add up. But in a lot of ways, I think that this film, despite it not being as charming as the original, despite it not being, despite, I guess, the music too, the music of the original just seems less generic too. Despite it having a couple of things less than stellar from the original, I think on areas that it counts, it does it better. And it makes this movie feel worthwhile of having a remake for it. And it's one of my personal favorite movies that Lucier and Farmer have done. And in my opinion, because they made this movie so well and it succeeded at the box office, it gave Lucier and Farmer a potential to do Halloween 3D. And it's a shame that they never got to make that movie. I want to read the script to see what it's like, but I've heard a lot about it, and I've already explained it in Drive Angry's review. So I won't really do it here, but yeah, I really dig this. I know it's not for everyone, but this is one of my personal favorites. So when it comes to a 0 to 5 star basis, despite its flaws, I have my nostalgia bias with it. I really do. And I'd probably give this like a 4 out of 5 stars. And I would give the remake, the original here, a 4 out of 5 stars too. In a lot of ways, they're even to me, and I love them both for their own specific things. So, yeah, that concludes my Patrick Lucier and Todd Farmer trilogy set of reviews. My next review, we're going to be getting into more Tom Atkins movies for a little while, and I can't wait to talk about that because Tom Atkins is one of my favorite horror icons of all time. So, yeah, let me hear your thoughts on this movie. I'll see you next time.